The small bell above the door of Pete's roadside diner jingled as another customer walked in. Jen wiped her hands on her apron and grabbed her notepad from her pocket. This was her third double shift this week. Her feet ached, but she put on a smile anyway. The diner sat just off Highway 40, a perfect pit stop for travelers, truckers, and locals alike. The linoleum floor had seen better days and the red vinyl booths were patched in places, but the food was good and the coffee was always hot. "Be right with you," she called out, balancing 4 plates along her arm. She'd gotten good at this over the 3 years she'd worked here. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most of them anyway. The afternoon rush had just died down when the rumble of motorcycles filled the parking lot. Jen glanced out the window to see a group of about 12 bikers pulling in, their chrome gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Their leather vests displayed patches reading "Steel Serpents" with a twisting snake design. "Looks like the serpents are passing through," said Dave, the cook, peering through the service window. "Better tell Ray to watch the register." Ray, the owner, was already eyeing the door from behind the counter. He was a fair man but cautious when it came to biker groups. Some caused trouble. Others were just hungry folks on the road. The bikers filed in, their boots heavy on the floor. They took over the corner section of the diner, pushing tables together without asking. Jen had served enough bikers to know most were decent people who just looked tough, but there was always 1 or 2 who liked to make things difficult. "You got this or you want me to take it?" asked Liz, the other waitress on duty. She was newer, only 6 months at Pete's, and Jen could see the worry in her eyes. "I've got it," Jen said, straightening her uniform. "They're usually good tippers if you don't act scared." Jen approached the table with a stack of menus. "Welcome to Pete's. Can I start you all with some drinks?" Most of the bikers ordered beers or coffee, nodding politely. But one man with a thick beard and arms covered in faded tattoos stared at her a bit too long. His leather vest had patches that the others didn't. He seemed important in their group. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice rough from years of cigarettes. "I'm Jen. I'll be your server today," she answered professionally, having dealt with this kind of attention before. "Our special is the meatloaf with 2 sides for $8.99. The bearded man chuckled and turned to his friends. "Hear that, boys? Jen's our server today. Ain't we lucky?" A few of them laughed, but Jen noticed others looked uncomfortable. An older biker with silver streaks in his long hair and intense eyes sat at the head of the table. The patch on his vest read Hawk. He gave the bearded man a look that quieted him down. 12 coffees to start," Hawk said, "and some menus. We've been riding since dawn." Jen nodded and headed back to the counter, feeling the bearded man's eyes on her as she walked away. As the afternoon wore on into evening, the diner filled with its usual Friday crowd. Families stopping for dinner, couples on dates, truckers grabbing a hot meal before getting back on the road. The bikers remained in their corner, growing louder as they ordered more beers. The bearded man, she'd heard the others call him Red, became more obnoxious with each round. His comments got cruder, and his friends seemed less amused and more embarrassed by his behavior. "Hey, Ray," Jen said quietly at the counter. "Table 9 is getting rowdy." Red's had at least 4 beers already. Ray glanced over at the bikers. "Keep an eye on it. If it gets worse, I'll ask them to settle down." Jen carried a tray of burgers and fries to the bikers' table. She'd been waitressing long enough to develop a sixth sense about trouble, and something about Red made her uneasy. As she set down the plates, he reached for his beer at the same moment she was placing his food, and his arm brushed against her. "Sorry about that," she said politely, stepping back. "Don't be sorry, honey," Red said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't mind getting close to a pretty thing like you." Some of the bikers shifted uncomfortably. Hawk shot Red another warning look. "Need anything else right now?" Jen asked the table, ignoring Red's comment. "Another round when you get a chance," one of the friendlier bikers said. "And maybe some more ketchup." Jen nodded and moved to her other tables, taking orders from a family with 2 tired-looking kids and an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. The diner hummed with conversation, silverware clinking against plates, and the sizzle of the grill from the kitchen. When she returned to the bikers' table with their drinks, Red had moved to sit on the outside of the booth, directly in her path. She had to step sideways to serve the others, and as she leaned across to place a beer, Red's hand brushed against her lower back. She flinched away, nearly spilling the drink. "Please don't do that," she said firmly but quietly, not wanting to make a scene. Do what? Red asked with fake innocence. Just being friendly. Hawk cleared his throat. Red, enough. Red shrugged and took a long drink of his beer, but the look in his eyes told Jen this wasn't over. She'd dealt with difficult customers before. It came with the job. But something about Red felt more threatening than the usual drunk patron. As the night went on, the diner gradually emptied. The elderly couple left a generous tip and a kind word. The family with kids thanked her for being patient with their fussy toddler. Even some of the bikers started to pay their tabs, heading outside for smoke breaks or to make phone calls, but Red remained, getting more intoxicated and more belligerent. Hawk and a few others stayed too, though Jen got the sense they were only there to keep an eye on their friend. Maybe we should head out. Find a motel, one of the bikers suggested to Hawk. Long ride tomorrow. Soon, Hawk replied, his eyes flicking between Red and Jen as she cleared nearby tables. Jen was wiping down a recently vacated booth when she felt someone behind her. She turned to find Red standing too close, swaying slightly. How about a smile for me? He slurred. Been serving us all night and hardly a smile. I'm just doing my job, sir, Jen replied, stepping back to put some distance between them. Can I get you anything else before you go? Yeah, Red said, taking a step closer. You can stop being so stuck up. We've spent good money here tonight. Jen noticed Ray watching from behind the counter, ready to intervene. Hawk had stood up from his table, too. I'm sorry if I've done something to upset you, Jen said calmly. But it's getting late and we're closing soon. Hear that, boys? Red called over his shoulder. Princess here wants us to leave. Jen tried to step around him, but he moved to block her path. Her heart began to race. The diner had mostly emptied out, with just a few customers remaining, all watching the scene unfold. Maybe we should go, Hawk said, approaching them. It's been a long day. Red ignored him, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Jen. Just one smile. That's all I'm asking for. Please step aside, Jen said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. What happened next would change everything at Pete's roadside diner forever, and none of them could have predicted what would come from this moment. Least of all Red, who had no idea what he was about to discover. The tension in Pete's roadside diner could have been cut with a knife. The few remaining customers watched nervously as Red towered over Jen, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. The overhead lights flickered slightly, casting shadows across the worn linoleum floor. I said smile. Red demanded again, leaning closer. His breath reeked of beer and cigarettes. Jen tried to step around him again, this time with her tray of dirty dishes held between them like a shield. I need to get back to work, she said firmly. Despite her calm exterior, her hands trembled slightly. She'd handled difficult customers before, but something about Red's eyes told her this was different. Hawk placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Come on, man. Leave the lady alone. She's just doing her job. Red shrugged off Hawk's hand with surprising force. I'm a paying customer, he slurred, jabbing a finger at his chest. I deserve some respect. You've had enough, Hawk said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. We're leaving. Now. For a moment, it seemed like Red might listen. He took a half step back, and Jen thought the worst was over. She started to move past him toward the kitchen when it happened. Jen's foot caught on an uneven tile, the same loose spot Ray had been meaning to fix for months. She stumbled forward, and the tray of dishes tilted. A half-full glass of water slid across the tray and spilled directly onto Red's leather vest and jeans. The diner went completely silent. Even the sizzle from the grill seemed to pause. Look what you did, Red roared, looking down at his wet clothes. The water had darkened his leather vest and splashed onto his prized belt buckle, a custom piece depicting the steel serpent's emblem. I'm so sorry, Jen said quickly. Setting down the tray on a nearby table, she grabbed a handful of napkins from her apron pocket. It was an accident, but Red wasn't listening. His face had turned a dark shade of red, veins bulging on his forehead. You did that on purpose. No, I didn't, Jen began, but she never got to finish her sentence. Red lunged forward, his massive hand grabbing the front of Jen's uniform shirt. With one violent motion, he yanked downward, the sound of tearing fabric echoing through the silent diner. Buttons scattered across the floor like tiny marbles. Hey, Ray shouted from behind the counter, already moving around to intervene. Jen stood frozen, her shirt torn from collar to waist, exposing her tank top underneath and part of her upper chest and shoulder. But instead of fear, her eyes blazed with unexpected fury. "Get out," Ray yelled, now standing beside Jen. He might have been 20 years older than Red and half his size, but the anger in his voice was formidable. "Get out of my diner right now before I call the police." Red seemed surprised by his own actions, looking down at the torn fabric still clutched in his fist. But rather than back down, he doubled down. "She disrespected me," he growled. "Nobody disrespects me." The few remaining customers had gotten to their feet, some moving toward the door, others pulling out phones. Dave the cook had emerged from the kitchen, a heavy spatula in his hand. It was Hawk who broke the standoff. He stepped between Red and Jen, his back to her. "You've crossed a line," he told Red, his voice low but carrying across the diner. "This isn't who we are." "Get out of my way," Red snarled, trying to push past him. That's when Hawk saw it. Over his shoulder, visible through Jen's torn shirt and the strap of her tank top, a tattoo. Not just any tattoo, but one he recognized instantly. His eyes widened, and he turned fully to face Jen. The tattoo on her upper chest and shoulder was partially visible now, intricate lines forming what appeared to be the beginning of a serpent design. But not just any serpent. Hawk's face changed completely, the anger replaced by shock and something else. Recognition. "Your shirt," Hawk said quietly to Jen. "I'm sorry about your shirt." But his eyes weren't on her face. They were fixed on what had been revealed. Red, still fuming, tried to push past Hawk again. "What are you apologizing to her for?" "Shut up," Hawk said with such authority that Red actually stopped mid-sentence. "Just shut up and look." The other bikers who had remained had now gathered closer, forming a loose circle. One by one, as they caught sight of Jen's partially revealed tattoo, their expressions changed from confrontation to confusion. "That's not possible," one of the younger bikers whispered. Jen, suddenly aware of what they were all staring at, crossed her arms over her chest. But it was too late, they had seen it. The tattoo she kept hidden beneath her uniform, the one she never talked about, was now the center of attention. "Where did you get that?" Hawk asked, his voice surprisingly gentle now. Ray stepped forward protectively. "That's none of your business. I want all of you out of here now." But Jen placed a hand on Ray's arm. "It's okay," she said quietly. For the first time since the incident began, she looked directly at Hawk. "You recognize it, don't you?" Hawk nodded slowly. "I do. But it's not. It can't be." Red, still drunk but now confused by the sudden change in atmosphere, tried to see what everyone was looking at. What are you all staring at?" One of the older bikers handed Jen his leather jacket. "Cover up, miss, please." She accepted it gratefully, slipping it over her shoulders. It was warm and heavy, smelling of leather and the open road. The jacket dwarfed her small frame, but it provided the dignity that Red had tried to take from her. "I think we need to talk," Hawk said to Jen. "But not here." "Not like this," Ray looked at Jen questioningly. "You want me to call the cops? Press charges against this guy?" He jerked his thumb toward Red. Jen took a deep breath, looking around at the bikers' faces, all now showing various degrees of shock, confusion, and in some cases, what looked like shame. Whatever they had seen in her tattoo had completely changed the dynamic. "No," she said finally. "No police. But I would like an explanation." She turned to Hawk. "You clearly know something about my tattoo. What is it?" The remaining customers watched in fascination as the tension in the room transformed into something else entirely. A strange sense of anticipation, as if everyone present knew they were witnessing something important unfolding. Hawk ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "It's not just any tattoo," he said slowly. "It's a steel serpent's design, but not the regular one." He hesitated, searching for words. "It's a memorial version, one that's only given to—" He trailed off, looking at her with new eyes. "Only given to what?" Jen prompted, though something in her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "Only given to family of fallen riders," Hawk finished quietly. "Brothers and sisters of serpents who died wearing our colors." The diner fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, heavy with unspoken questions and dawning realizations. Red's face had drained of its angry flush, replaced by a sickly pallor as the implications of what Hawk was saying sank in. "Who was it?" one of the younger bikers asked. "Who was your—" Jen's hand moved unconsciously to touch her shoulder beneath the borrowed leather jacket. "My brother," she said simply. The word hung in the air like smoke. Brother. A fallen steel serpent. The connection none of them had made until this moment. Ray and Dave exchanged looks of confusion. In the 3 years Jen had worked at the diner, she'd never mentioned having a brother who was a biker, let alone one who had died. Hawk took a step closer to Jen, respectful now. "What was his road name?" he asked gently. Jen hesitated, as if speaking the name aloud might summon a ghost. "They called him Maverick," she finally said. The reaction was immediate. Several of the older bikers inhaled sharply. One removed his bandana as if at a funeral. Hawk himself seemed to age 10 years in an instant, his shoulders slumping. "Maverick," he repeated softly. "Mike Davidson." Jen nodded, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "You knew him?" "Knew him?" Hawk said with a sad laugh. "He was one of our founding members, one of the best riders I ever knew." The revelation rippled through the diner. The remaining customers, witnessing this unexpected turn of events, were spellbound. Even Ray and Dave stood motionless, watching the scene unfold. Red, who had been standing in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Maverick?" His voice was small now, the bluster gone. "Your brother was Maverick?" Jen turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "Yes, he died 3 years ago. Highway accident, they said, 3 years. The same amount of time she'd been working at Pete's roadside diner. The same diner that sat just off Highway 40, where her brother had." The connections were falling into place for everyone in the room. The weight of coincidence, or perhaps fate, pressed down on them all. Hawk looked at the torn uniform, then at Red, and his expression hardened again. "You had no idea who she was," he said to Red. "None of us did, but that doesn't excuse what you did." Red looked like he might be sick. "I didn't know," he mumbled. "How could I know?" "You shouldn't need to know someone's connections to treat them with respect," Hawk replied sharply. "But the fact is, you just disrespected the sister of a fallen brother. In our world, there's no coming back from that." The implications of those words hung heavy in the air as the bikers all turned to look at Red, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. What had started as a simple evening at a roadside diner had become something much more complicated, a collision of past and present, of grief and recognition. And for Jen and the Steel Serpents, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The clock on the diner wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed Hawk's words. Ray had flipped the sign on the door to closed, and the last regular customers had left, sensing the need for privacy. Only the Steel Serpents, Jen, Ray, Dave the cook, and Liz remained. Jen sat in a booth now, still wearing the borrowed leather jacket. Someone had made a fresh pot of coffee, and steaming mug sat untouched on the table. Red had been escorted outside by 2 other bikers, his protest fading as the door swung shut behind them. "I can't believe Maverick never mentioned having a sister," one of the older bikers said, shaking his head. "They called him Grizzly, and the gray in his beard suggested he'd been riding with the club for decades." "He talked about you," Hawk said quietly to Jen. "But he never used your name. Just called you my kid sister. Said you were in college studying to be a nurse." Jen's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "I was," she said after a moment. "Had to drop out after he died. Mom got sick, medical bills piled up." She gestured vaguely around the diner. This place was hiring. The simplicity of her statement hung in the air. The bikers exchanged glances, piecing together what had happened after their brother's death. None of them had known about Jen's struggles, or even known she existed beyond vague mentions. "The tattoo," Hawk said, nodding toward her shoulder. "When did you get it?" Jen shifted the leather jacket slightly, revealing just the edge of the intricate design. "About a month after the funeral. A guy came to the house, tall, bald, had a shop downtown. Said Mike had arranged it before." She swallowed. "Said if anything ever happened to him, I was to get this specific design, that it would identify me to his brothers if I ever needed help." "Sounds like Inkmaster Frank," one of the bikers said. "He does all our memorial work," Hawk nodded. "And you never thought to look us up? To use that insurance policy your brother left you?" Jen's expression hardened slightly. "I was angry," she admitted. "At all of it. The bikes, the club, the risks he took. After Mom got sick, she shrugged. "I wanted to make it on my own." "Stubborn," Grizzly said with a sad smile. "Just like your brother." For the first time that evening, Jen smiled too, a small pained thing but genuine. He was the most hard-headed person I've ever known. Amen to that, several bikers murmured in agreement, and the tension in the room eased slightly. Ray brought over a sandwich plate and set it in front of Jen. "Eat something," he said gruffly. "Been a hell of a night." He looked at the bikers suspiciously. "I still think we should press charges against that guy who tore her shirt." Hawk held up a hand. "We'll handle Red. In our world, what he did. There are consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Ray asked warily. "Nothing like what you're thinking," Hawk assured him. "But disrespecting the family of a fallen brother, it's one of our highest taboos. He'll be stripped of his rank patches at minimum, possibly his membership altogether." Jen took a small bite of her sandwich watching this exchange. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said. "He was drunk, made a mistake." "No," Hawk said firmly. "Alcohol doesn't excuse behavior. It reveals character." And he revealed his. The diner phone rang, startling everyone. Dave answered it, then held it out to Ray. "It's Tom from the motel down the road. Says he's got a bunch of bikers trying to rent rooms. Wants to know if everything's okay." Ray took the phone, glancing at the steel serpents. "Yeah, Tom. No, everything's fine now. Just a misunderstanding." He paused, listening. "Yeah, they're good for the money. Thanks for checking." He hung up and turned to Hawk. "Your boys need rooms for the night?" Hawk nodded. "We were planning to ride through to Millerville, but it's getting late." "We're staying," Grizzly added firmly. "Got some catching up to do with Maverick's sister." Jen looked surprised, then uncertain. "I have the early shift tomorrow," she said. "I should really get home and sleep." "Tomorrow's covered," Ray said unexpectedly. "Take the day off, paid." When Jen started to protest, he added, "After what happened tonight, you deserve it. Besides," he nodded toward the bikers, "seems like you've got some family business to attend to." The word family hung in the air. The steel serpents weren't her blood, but they had been her brother's chosen family, and based on the tattoo on her shoulder, he had wanted them to look out for her if needed. "There's a lot we should talk about," Hawk said. "About your brother, about what he meant to the club." He hesitated. "And about why you've been working in this diner for 3 years without ever reaching out to us, when we could have helped." Jen looked down at her hands. "It's complicated. Life usually is," Grizzly said with unexpected gentleness. Outside, the sound of motorcycles starting up indicated that some of the bikers were heading to the motel. Through the window, Jen could see Red sitting alone on the curb, his head in his hands. 2 bikers stood nearby, seemingly guarding him rather than comforting him. "What exactly happened?" Jen asked suddenly. "To my brother? The police report said he lost control on a curve, but Mike knew that highway like the back of his hand." The bikers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We've wondered the same thing," Hawk said carefully. "The official report didn't sit right with many of us." "What aren't you saying?" Jen asked, her voice sharper now. Hawk sighed heavily. "There were rumors. Nothing we could prove. But your brother had been looking into some business arrangements that weren't entirely above board. Some connections between local officials and distribution networks moving through our territory." "Distribution of what?" "The usual," Grizzly said grimly. "Pills mostly, synthetics. County's been hit hard the last 5 years. Jen set down her sandwich. "Are you saying my brother was investigating drug trafficking? Why? Was he involved?" "No," Hawk said firmly. "The opposite. Maverick had strong feelings about that stuff. His best friend from high school died of an overdose, remember?" Jen nodded slowly. "Bobby Tremont. I remember the funeral. Your brother was gathering evidence, planning to take it to the state police, bypass the local authorities he thought might be compromised." Hawk ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "The night before his accident, he told me he had everything he needed, that he was going to end it all. And then he conveniently crashed on a road he knew better than anyone," Jen said, the implications sinking in. The diner fell silent again. The only sound the humming of the refrigerators and the occasional passing car on the highway outside. We couldn't prove anything, Hawk said finally. The bike was too damaged and the local police closed the case quickly. Too quickly, if you ask me. Why didn't you tell his family? Tell me? Jen demanded, anger creeping into her voice. We tried to contact your mother after the funeral, Grizzly said. She made it clear she blamed the club for his death. Said she never wanted to see any of us again. Jen closed her eyes briefly. That sounded like her mother, proud and hurt, pushing away anything connected to the pain. She was grieving, she said softly. We both were. We respected her wishes, Hawk said. But your brother had made arrangements. The tattoo, certain instructions with our club lawyer. He wanted a safety net for you even if you never used it. Jen touched her shoulder again, the tattoo hidden beneath layers of fabric but suddenly feeling like it was burning into her skin. All these years, it had been more than just a memorial. It had been a key, a connection to people who had cared about her brother, and by extension, about her. I need to show you something, she said abruptly, standing up. It's at my apartment. Something Mike left me that I never understood. The bikers looked at her with renewed interest. Hawk stood as well. What kind of something? A box, Jen said. Locked. He gave it to me about a week before he died. Said if anything ever happened to him I should open it. She bit her lip. But he never gave me the key. I tried to pick the lock, tried cutting it, nothing worked. Eventually She shrugged. I put it away. Another reminder of him and his secrets. What kind of box? Grizzly asked, his voice suddenly tense. Metal, about this big, Jen indicated with her hands. Has a strange symbol engraved on the lid, like a serpent, but with something in its mouth. Hawk and Grizzly exchanged a look that spoke volumes. A serpent with a key in its mouth? Hawk asked quietly. Jen's eyes widened. Yes. How did you know? Because the key is the club's most protected symbol, Grizzly said. It means the box contains something that could either save the club or destroy it. And I think I know where that key might be, Hawk added, his expression grim. With our club treasurer who disappeared 2 months after your brother's death, a man named Victor Coleman. He paused. But everyone called him Raven. The name meant nothing to Jen, but the reactions of the other bikers told her this was significant. I thought Raven retired to Florida, one of the younger bikers said, confused. That's what we were told, Hawk replied, but no one's heard from him in almost 3 years. No phone calls, no postcards. For a man who never missed a club anniversary, that struck me as odd. The implications hung in the air, connecting invisible dots. Mike's death, an investigation into drug trafficking, a mysterious box, and a missing club treasurer. Pieces of a puzzle that had remained scattered until tonight's chance encounter. I need to see that box, Hawk said to Jen. Tonight. Jen looked around at the circle of bikers, strangers who had been her brother's brothers, men who might hold answers to questions she'd stopped asking out of grief and resignation. Okay, she said finally. But I'm not promising anything. It might just be personal stuff, photos, memories. Or it might be what got your brother killed, Grizzly said bluntly. The diner fell silent once more as the weight of his words settled over them all. Outside, the night had deepened and the highway stretched empty in both directions. Somewhere in that darkness lay answers, and possibly dangers, that had been waiting 3 long years to be discovered. Jen stood up straighter, a determination in her eyes that reminded the older bikers of her brother. Let's go then, she said, pulling the borrowed leather jacket tighter around her shoulders. I want to know the truth, whatever it is. The path that had begun with a torn shirt was leading somewhere none of them could have predicted. But for the first time in 3 years, Jen felt something she had almost forgotten, hope that her brother's death might finally make sense. And perhaps, that justice might finally be possible. Jen's apartment sat above a laundromat 3 blocks from Pete's diner. The building was old but well-maintained, with flower boxes hanging from some of the windows. It wasn't much, but it was clean and affordable, two qualities that had become increasingly important after her mother's medical bills started piling up. A small convoy of motorcycles pulled up outside, their engines cutting off one by one. Hawk, Grizzly, and two other bikers, introduced as Doc and Whiskey, had accompanied her. The rest had gone to secure rooms at the motel down the road. "Second floor," Jen said, leading them through a side entrance. The stairwell smelled of detergent from the laundromat below, the warm, clean scent oddly at odds with the tension of the moment. Mrs. Chen from apartment 2B poked her head out as they passed. Her eyes widened at the sight of four large bikers following her usually quiet neighbor. "Everything okay, Jen?" she asked, her voice concerned but firm. "Yes, Mrs. Chen. These are friends of my brother," Jen explained, realizing how strange it must look. The elderly woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. "I'll be up watching my shows if you need anything," she said, the implication clear. She was keeping an eye on the situation. "Your neighbor's got spirit," Doc commented as they continued down the hall. "She brings me soup when I'm sick and watches out for packages," Jen said with a small smile. "Been like a grandmother to me since I moved in." Her apartment door had 3 locks, standard for a single woman living alone in this part of town. Inside, the space was small but homey. Mismatched furniture that had seen better days was arranged to make the most of the limited square footage. Books lined one wall and a few potted plants thrived on the windowsill. Photos in simple frames dotted the surfaces, many featuring a young man with Jen's same dark hair and determined expression. "That's Mike," Whiskey said softly, picking up one of the frames. "Looks different without his beard." "He grew that awful thing after he joined the club," Jen said, a hint of fondness in her voice. "Mom hated it." The bikers moved carefully through the space, their large frames and leather vests looking out of place among the soft furnishings and houseplants. They remained standing as if sitting would somehow make this odd situation too comfortable. "The box is in my bedroom," Jen said. "Give me a minute." She disappeared through a doorway, leaving the 4 men standing awkwardly in her living room. "Maverick's kid sister," Doc murmured, shaking his head. "All this time working at a diner on our regular route. If Red hadn't—" he trailed off. "Yeah," Hawk agreed. "Fate's got a strange way of working." Jen returned carrying a metal box roughly the size of a shoebox. It was dark steel with a heavy padlock securing the front clasp. As she had described, the lid was engraved with the image of a serpent with a key in its mouth. But the design was more intricate than a typical steel serpent's emblem. The snake's scales were detailed down to individual etchings, and its eyes seemed to watch them as Jen set the box on her small dining table. "This is it," she said simply. "I tried everything to open it after he died. The lock won't budge." Grizzly stepped forward, examining the box without touching it. "That's club craftsmanship," he said. "Tommy Forge's work. He did all our special metalwork before he retired. And that's not just any padlock," Hawk added. "That's a custom job. One-of-a-kind key, impossible to pick or cut." He looked at Jen. "Your brother really wanted to make sure only the right person could open this." "And you think this Raven person has the key?" Jen asked. "I'm sure of it," Hawk said grimly. "As club treasurer, Raven was keeper of our most important items. Keys, deeds, certain insurance policies." Doc ran a finger along the edge of the box. "The fact that Maverick used this specific box, with this symbol..." He looked at Hawk. "It means whatever's inside is meant to protect the club, right? That's what the serpent with the key represents. Protection. Or it's evidence that could burn us all to the ground," Whiskey added quietly. Jen looked between them, frustration building. "This is my brother we're talking about. His legacy. His secrets. I deserve to know what's in this box." "You're right," Hawk said after a moment. "And we might have a way to open it without the key." "How?" Jen asked. "There's a failsafe," Grizzly explained. "Tommy Forge built all these boxes with a secondary opening mechanism. A code known only to the club president and vice president." "Which would be you two," Jen said, looking between Hawk and Grizzly. Hawk nodded. "The code changes with each presidency. When your brother died, I had just taken over as president from our founder, Old Man Phillips." "So you know how to open it?" Jen asked, hope rising in her voice. "Maybe," Hawk said, stepping closer to the box. "May I?" Jen nodded, and Hawk gently turned the box, examining each side carefully. The others watched in silence as his fingers traced the edges, feeling for something invisible to the casual observer. Here, he finally said, pressing on what appeared to be a solid section of the base. There was a soft click, and a small panel slid aside, revealing a circular indentation with strange markings around the edge. Is that it? Jen asked, leaning closer. Part of it, Hawk said, reaching inside his vest. He pulled out a silver coin on a chain, his president's medallion. Every Steel Serpent's president carries one of these. It's not just for show. He placed the medallion into the circular indentation, a perfect fit. Then, turning it carefully, he aligned specific marks on the coin with corresponding notches in the box. Nothing happened. Hawk frowned, trying again with slightly different alignment. Still nothing. Maybe the mechanism's jammed after all this time, Doc suggested. Or maybe it needs the vice president's medallion too, Whiskey added. Grizzly was already pulling out his own medallion, similar to Hawk's but with subtle differences in the engraving. Let me try. For several tense minutes they took turns trying different combinations with the medallions. Jen watched, hope slowly fading as each attempt failed. It seemed the box was determined to keep its secrets. Wait, Grizzly said suddenly. We're thinking about this wrong. If Maverick set this up 3 years ago, he wouldn't have calibrated it for our medallions. He'd have used Old Man Phillips's codes, Hawk realized, straightening up. The previous administration. But we don't have Old Man's medallion, Doc pointed out. He's buried with it, club tradition. The room fell silent as they contemplated this apparent dead end. No, Jen said suddenly, moving to a bookshelf. We might. She pulled down a photo album and flipped through it quickly. Here, my high school graduation. Mike came with his club president, an older man with a white beard. Is that your Old Man Phillips? The bikers gathered around, looking at the photo. Sure enough, there was Maverick, clean-shaven in a suit, standing proudly next to his sister in her cap and gown. Beside them was a tall, distinguished-looking man with a snow-white beard and piercing eyes. Around his neck, clearly visible, was a medallion. That's him, Whiskey confirmed. But how does this help us? Look, Jen said, pointing to the medallion in the photo. You can see the markings. They're different from yours. Hawk studied the image closely. She's right. The alignment is different. He moved back to the box and tried a new combination, based on what they could make out in the photograph. Another click, louder this time, and the entire base of the box shifted. Slightly, that's it, Grizzly exclaimed. With careful fingers, Hawk rotated the base of the box clockwise. There was a series of soft mechanical sounds from inside, like tiny gears moving into place. Then with a final click, the padlock sprung open. The room went completely silent. After 3 years of mystery, the box was finally unlocked. You should open it, Hawk said to Jen. It's your brother's legacy. With trembling hands, Jen removed the padlock and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was a USB drive, a small leather notebook, and a sealed envelope with her name written in her brother's distinctive handwriting. She reached for the envelope first, breaking the seal carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. Her brother's words, written 3 years ago, finally delivered. Jen, if you're reading this, something's happened to me. I'm sorry for the secrets, for the danger I might have brought to your door. The USB contains evidence of corruption that goes higher than you can imagine. Names, dates, bank transactions, everything needed to bring down a network that's poisoning our community. The notebook has my personal observations, connections I've made that the hard evidence doesn't show. I trusted my brothers with my life, but there's a snake in our midst. Trust Hawk and Grizzly with this information. No one else. Not until you know who's truly loyal. I love you, kid. Be smarter than your big brother. Mike. Jen's vision blurred with tears as she finished reading. She handed the letter to Hawk without a word, watching as he and then the others read it in turn. He knew, Hawk said finally, his voice tight. He knew someone in the club was involved. And he still rode out that night, Grizzly added, shaking his head. Alone. What's on the drive? Whiskey asked, eyeing the small device. Jen picked it up, turning it over in her hand. One way to find out, she said, moving to a small desk in the corner where her laptop sat. The others gathered around as she inserted the USB. A password prompt appeared on screen. Of course, Doc muttered. Another lock. But Jen was already typing. It'll be as usual, she said with sad certainty. Mom's birthday backwards plus the day he got his first bike. The screen unlocked, revealing a folder structure meticulously organized by date and location. She clicked on a file labeled read_first.txt, and a document opened. The room grew tense as they read through Mike's digital journal. It detailed months of careful investigation into a prescription drug trafficking operation that used the county's legitimate pharmaceutical supply chains to divert medications to illegal markets. Mike had traced the operation from street dealers all the way up to the distributors, and finally to the corrupt officials who made it all possible. Names jumped out from the pages: the county sheriff, 2 judges, a state representative, and several business owners. Mike had documented meetings, photographed handoffs, and recorded conversations that left little doubt about their involvement. "This is bigger than we thought," Hawk said quietly. "No wonder they wanted him gone." "Look at this," Jen said, opening another folder labeled Club. Inside was a single document named raven.pdf. The file contained bank statements, photos, and text messages clearly showing that Victor Raven Coleman had been taking payments from the trafficking organization. Not just as an individual, but using club accounts to launder money for the operation. "Son of a bitch," Grizzly breathed. "He was using our legitimate businesses to clean their dirty money." "And Maverick figured it out," Doc added. "Which means Raven had the most to lose if this information got out." Whiskey concluded grimly. Jen looked up from the screen, her expression hardening. "You said this man disappeared 2 months after my brother died, that he supposedly retired to Florida?" "That's what we were told," Hawk confirmed. "But now we have to find him," Jen said, determination replacing grief in her voice. "If he arranged my brother's accident, he needs to answer for it." The bikers exchanged looks. What had begun as an ugly incident in a roadside diner had uncovered a 3-year-old conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of local government and implicated one of their own. "We'll find him," Hawk promised, "but we need to be careful. These people have already killed once to protect their operation, and they're still out there." Jen closed the laptop, unplugging the USB drive and clutching it tightly. "I've waited 3 years for answers," she said. "I've mourned my brother without knowing why he died. I've struggled to keep going while the people responsible continued with their lives." She looked around at the 4 bikers, her brother's chosen family. "I'm done waiting." Outside, a motorcycle engine roared to life, then cut off abruptly. Footsteps pounded up the stairwell, and there was an urgent knock at the door. Doc moved to look through the peephole. "It's Slider," he said, opening the door to reveal a young biker, breathless from running. "You need to come back to the motel," Slider said, his words tumbling out. "It's Red, he's gone." "Gone?" Grizzly repeated. "What do you mean, gone? I thought you were watching him." "We were," Slider insisted, "but he said he needed to use the bathroom and then he just disappeared. Back window was open." "So he ran," Whiskey said with disgust. "Coward." But Hawk's expression had turned deadly serious. "No," he said slowly. "It's worse than that." He turned to Jen. "Your brother's letter mentioned a snake in our midst. We all assumed it was Raven, but what if there's another? Someone still in the club? You think Red is involved?" Doc asked incredulously. "I think Red made a phone call," Hawk replied grimly. "And I think whoever he called now knows that Maverick's evidence has finally been found." The implications sank in quickly. If Red was connected to the same people who had silenced Mike, then everyone in the apartment was now in danger. "We need to move," Hawk said decisively. "Now grab the box, the drive, everything." "Where are we going?" Jen asked, already reaching for her jacket. "Somewhere they won't look for us," Hawk replied. "Somewhere safe while we figure out our next move." As if to punctuate his words, headlights swept across the apartment windows as several vehicles pulled up outside. Too many to be just their club members, and too coordinated to be coincidence. "Too late," Grizzly said, moving to the window and peeking out. "County Sheriff's Department. 3 cruisers." Jen felt a chill run through her. The county sheriff, one of the names prominently featured in her brother's files. "Back door?" Whiskey asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "Fire escape," Jen corrected, grabbing her backpack and stuffing the metal box, USB drive, and her brother's notebook inside. "Through my bedroom window." As they moved quickly toward the back of the apartment, heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. Someone pounded on Mrs. Chen's door across the hall. Time had run out. The truth about Mike's death had finally surfaced. But so had the danger that had taken his life. And now Jen and her brother's family would have to fight not just for justice, but for survival. The months following that night changed everything for Jen. What began with a torn shirt ended with dismantled corruption, long-delayed justice, and a new family she never expected to find. The escape from her apartment that night was just the beginning. While sheriff's deputies searched her building, Jen and the Steel Serpents had slipped away through the narrow fire escape and into the darkness. They'd made it to their bikes just as flashlights swept the alleyway, engines roaring to life as they scattered in different directions, a tactic they'd practiced countless times for very different reasons. Hawk had taken Jen on the back of his motorcycle, the wind whipping through her hair as they sped down back roads she'd never known existed. Her backpack, containing her brother's evidence, pressed against her spine, a physical reminder of why they were running and what was at stake. They'd regrouped at an old hunting cabin owned by a club member's uncle, 30 miles outside town. It was there, around a battered wooden table lit by oil lamps, that they formed a plan. "We can't go to local law enforcement," Hawk had said, spreading out a map of the county. "According to Mike's files, Sheriff Dawson is neck-deep in this. State police?" Whiskey had suggested. Grizzly shook his head. Too risky without knowing who else might be compromised. Mike's files mentioned connections in the state government. "FBI," Jen had said suddenly, all eyes turning to her. "My college roommate's father is an FBI agent in the field office 2 counties over. He always told us if we ever needed help, we could trust him." That connection had proven to be the lifeline they needed. Agent Thomas Wells had listened to their story with increasing alarm, examined the evidence, and immediately understood the gravity of what they'd uncovered. Within hours, he had assembled a small, trusted team and secured the files. "This is a major operation," he'd told them. "Cross-jurisdictional organized crime, corruption in law enforcement and government. It's exactly what our public corruption unit handles." But building a case that would stand up in court had taken time. Weeks stretched into months as Agent Wells and his team carefully verified each piece of Mike's evidence, connected additional dots, and prepared for coordinated arrests that would dismantle the entire network at once. During that time, Jen had been placed in witness protection, living in a small apartment in a city 4 hours away. The FBI had arranged a temporary job for her at a local hospital, allowing her to use her nursing skills for the first time since dropping out of school. It had been lonely, isolating work, but every day brought her closer to justice for her brother. The Steel Serpents, meanwhile, had conducted their own investigation into Red and the missing treasurer, Raven. What they discovered confirmed their worst suspicions. Raven had indeed been laundering money for the drug operation through club businesses, and when Mike had gotten too close to the truth, Raven had arranged the accident on Highway 40. But Red's involvement had been more complicated. He wasn't part of the original conspiracy, just a weak man with gambling debts who had been paid to keep an eye on the Steel Serpents and report any mention of Mike's investigation. The night at Pete's Diner, his drunken aggression had inadvertently exposed the very thing he'd been instructed to watch for. When the arrests finally came, they made headlines across the state. In coordinated pre-dawn raids, federal agents arrested 27 people connected to the drug trafficking operation. The county sheriff, 2 judges, a state representative, 6 deputies, 4 pharmacists, and various others involved in distribution and money laundering. Among those arrested was Victor Raven Coleman, found living under an assumed name in Arizona. He had changed his appearance but not his expensive tastes, which had ultimately led to his capture. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Not only had he helped launder money for the drug operation, but digital forensics had uncovered text messages proving he had arranged for Mike's motorcycle to be tampered with the night of his fatal crash. Red had also been arrested, though he quickly turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony helped fill in gaps in the case, strengthening the prosecution's hand against the bigger players. On a crisp fall morning almost exactly 1 year after the incident at Pete's Diner, Jen stood on the steps of the federal courthouse after the final sentencing hearing. Raven and the other ringleaders had received lengthy prison terms. The corrupt officials had been removed from office. The system that had poisoned the county for years had been dismantled. Justice had come at last. "Your brother would be proud," Hawk said, standing beside her in an uncharacteristic suit and tie. Several other Steel Serpents stood nearby, having testified in the various trials over the past months. I think he would, Jen agreed, looking out over the courthouse plaza, but I still miss him every day. He's still with us, Grizzly said, touching the steel serpent's patch on his leather vest. Always will be. In the year since that fateful night, the steel serpents had become a constant presence in Jen's life. They had respected her need for independence but made it clear that she would always have their support, financially, emotionally, whatever she needed. They were, as Hawk often reminded her, family. With the trials concluded and witness protection no longer necessary, Jen faced a choice about her future. She could return to her old life, perhaps go back to Pete's Diner, or she could start fresh. The decision had already been made. Using money from a victim's compensation fund and donations from the Steel Serpents, she had re-enrolled in nursing school to complete the degree she'd abandoned after her brother's death. Her experience during the months in witness protection had rekindled her passion for healthcare. So when do classes start? Doc asked as they walked down the courthouse steps. 2 weeks, Jen replied. I've already found an apartment near campus. The club's got your tuition covered, Hawk reminded her. And anything else you need. I know, Jen said with a smile. But I've also applied for 3 scholarships and lined up a part-time job at the University Medical Center. I want to do this on my own, mostly. Hawk laughed. Stubborn. Just like my brother, Jen finished. I know. They reached the parking lot where a row of motorcycles gleamed in the autumn sun. Beside them sat a small blue sedan. Practical, reliable transport for a nursing student. Speaking of stubborn, Grizzly said, reaching into his vest pocket. The club voted, unanimously. He handed her a small box. Inside was a steel serpent's patch, different from the ones the members wore, but official nonetheless. Honorary member, Grizzly explained. First one ever. Jen ran her fingers over the embroidered serpent. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Hawk told her. You're family. You always were. We just didn't know it until some drunk idiot tore your shirt. The memory of that night, which had once been humiliating, now drew a small smile from Jen. Where is Red now? Witness protection, Doc said. After testifying against his former gambling associates and the corrupt officials, he couldn't stay around here. Last I heard, he's working construction somewhere in the Midwest. Good, Jen said, surprising herself with the sincerity in her voice. I hope he builds a better life. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, the fall breeze rustling the trees lining the courthouse square. So much had changed in a year. Pain had led to healing. Secrets had given way to truth. And strangers had become family. There's one more thing, Whiskey said, nodding toward the street. A pickup truck pulled up and Ray from Pete's Diner climbed out. Followed by Dave the cook and Liz, the other waitress. They approached with smiles and a small cake box. Couldn't miss your big day, Ray said gruffly. Figured the end of all this deserved some celebration. You guys didn't have to come all this way, Jen said, genuinely touched. Course we did, Dave replied. Diner's not the same without you. Though business has picked up since the Steel Serpent started coming in regularly, Liz added with a grin. Ray opened the cake box to reveal a small chocolate cake with "Justice Served" written in blue icing. Not very fancy, but it's your favorite. Jen felt tears threatening. These people, the diner staff, the bikers, had become an unlikely support system, a mosaic of caring that had helped her survive the darkest year of her life. I don't know how to thank you all, she said. Looking around the circle, you already have, Hawk replied. You finished what your brother started. You brought down the people who were poisoning our community. That's thanks enough. As they shared cake in the courthouse parking lot, Jen thought about how life's most significant changes often come from unexpected moments. A torn shirt had revealed a hidden connection. A chance encounter had uncovered long-buried truths. And people who might have remained strangers had become an unbreakable circle of support. The road ahead would have its challenges. Nursing school would be demanding. Building a new life would take time. But for the first time since losing her brother, Jen felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, surrounded by exactly the right people. Later that evening, after goodbyes had been said and plans made for future visits, Jen stood at her brother's grave. She placed a small steel serpent figurine at the base of his headstone, next to the fresh flowers. We did it, Mike. she said softly. We got them. All of them. She touched the memorial tattoo on her shoulder, the one that had changed everything when it was revealed that night at Pete's. And I found your other family. Or maybe they found me. The autumn sun was setting, painting the cemetery in gold and amber. Tomorrow would bring packing and preparations for her move to nursing school. But tonight was for remembrance, for gratitude, and for the peace that comes with closure. As Jen walked back to her car, she passed a group of bikers at another grave, club members paying respects to one of their own. They nodded respectfully as she passed, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. The steel serpents had taught her something important. Family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about who stood beside you when the world turned harsh. Sometimes it was about who helped you find justice when it seemed impossible. And sometimes it was about who saw your scars, whether physical or emotional, and honored the story behind them. Her brother had known that all along. And now, finally, so did she.